It's about time we had absolute proof of what I think is one of the most ridiculous Bible stories ever, the global flood.
We're talking about rock solid evidence for the worldwide flood.
Stick around to the end of the video as Eric Hovind and Dr Tim Clarey give us rock solid proof that the biblical flood was real. You're more likely to convince me that 16 times 2 is 34.
16 times 2? 34.
Hello, I'm the Skeptic. I watch videos on YouTube that make extraordinary claims, whether that's evolution is fake or the Bible is true, but mostly the claim that a God is real and then explain why I don't accept their position. Before we start today's video, if you've seen my videos before, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell. That would be awesome. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks over the last few videos. Travis White and Tanner Bullock. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you. The Bible is filled with hilariously bad stories, which theists struggle to demonstrate to be true. So when one of the dumbest stories from the supposed word of an undemonstrated God comes with evidence, it just had to be looked into. Take it away, Eric.
You're telling people, you're doing the research, the scientific research, there's no doubt about it. God's word got it right, there was a worldwide flood.
God's word is true. And that's the message that I get to tell people. I get to tell people God's word is true because there really is rock solid evidence, to use your words, of a global flood. There really, the more I look, every continent I've been looked at, it all shows evidence of a progressive flood. Starts so, minimal, more. Just like you read Genesis 7, you'll see they kept going higher, increasingly higher, exceedingly higher. God laid it all out there. His word is true. There really was a global flood. And the rocks show it.
This program, we got a lot of people watching. By the way, if you're joining us on YouTube or on Facebook, thank you guys for hanging out with us. You guys get to join us for the first half hour of the show.
The first half hour of the show? Jeez. Eric really is bad with numbers. This video's 42 minutes and 55 seconds. And why would it take so long to provide proof of something? Could that be because it's so ambiguous it takes a lot of explaining to shoehorn into some weird explanation of the rock-solid evidence?
You are a PhD geologist, and you agree with the Bible. What do you say to people that go, I'm a geologist and I disagree with the Bible? Like, do you have any thoughts for them?
Well, the rocks are real.
Rocks are real? Please tell me that isn't your argument. There are rocks. Some rocks show that water sat upon them once, so that's proof. Yeah. And I'm sure Western Michigan University are thrilled that Tim uses his geology PhD from them to assert that the global flood was real.
The rocks don't have it. There's no agenda on the rocks. The rocks still reflect a global flood.
The data is the
data. The data is there. I've had people read my book, Carved in Stone. They looked at it. They read through the whole thing. And they said, the data, we love your data, Tim. We just don't like your interpretation.
And what does that tell you? You look at information and find a way to make it back up your belief. That's not how it works. That's like me finding an arrowhead made from flint and saying it's proof that Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe, leaf be upon her, has such incredible power that flint arrows can't ever penetrate her skin.
But the data is real, and no one, to my knowledge, has ever done the research we're doing.
No one has done the research you're doing? Maybe because it's a little bit silly. Maybe because it's a waste of time. Maybe because you're doing enough to confirm that no one else needs to do it.
This that I've been compiling for almost 9 years now. I've got through 5 continents. I'm starting on the 6th continent. And no one has done to the extent that I've done. There was some early studies in the 70s and 80s. But now there's so much more drilling offshore, there's so much more data offshore that we're finding some amazing things, like coal seams 200 miles offshore.
Hang on, you're looking at rocks that are already underwater and saying, look, there was once water on these rocks. I mean, really, I can't. I quit.
They shouldn't be there. The secular community has to say they grew there, but how can they grow in 3,000 feet of water, 3,000 meters of water?
He must have skipped the plate tectonics classes, or just chooses to ignore the fact that the Earth shifts land masses, and some parts that were once underwater are now high above sea level, and other parts that were once drier than Mercury are now deep below the seas. Never mind the fact that coal takes millions of years to form. Never mind the fact that dead plants underwater don't decay completely because of a lack of oxygen, and so the peat that remained could have quite easily become coal. It's like finding a blue M&M in a packet of regular M&Ms and being surprised that it's there.
In the middle of you saying geology proves the Earth is millions of years old, because isn't the columns,
right.
not the core samples that you're studying, but the geologic column, isn't that like one of the major tenets of The Earth is millions and billions of years old?
But the rocks don't tell us how old they are. They just give us the order. They just say the earlier ones were deposited first because they're piled on top of the later and more young ones. So the rocks don't tell us the age. The fossils don't tell us the age either. Now they can go through an age date, lava layers or flood or ash flow and that sort of thing. But that's, those are based on a lot of assumptions, which is another whole talk in itself. We, as creationists, we disagree with those great age dates because they're unverifiable. They're science that can't be tested.
Or there can be, and it's completely explainable, but because it doesn't go with the 6,000-year-old Earth story, you dismiss it.
When you go back, when they do test them, and I talk about this in my book, and other people have shown this, that in Steve Austin and predecessors at ICR, they've shown that even the secular scientists, when they know the age of that lava flow, when it was supposed to happen historically, whether it's 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, 200 years ago, when they age date it using these radioactive techniques, their numbers are off by orders of magnitude every time. There's almost no example where they knew the age, maybe one, by accident almost, where they knew the age of that particular lava layer when it erupted by historical records, and they get dates that are like hundreds of thousands of years old or millions of years old when they know it happened in the last 1,000 years.
And you're talking about dates using the radiometric type dating
Potassium,
systems.
argon, things like that, argon, those type of radioactive dating techniques that, most of geology, we don't use carbon-14 because they assume it's all decayed away.
Right.
They assume millions of years and billions of years. But the rocks really don't tell us how old they are.
It sounds as if Tim would only be happy if the rocks had dates printed on them, like Made in Great Britain, 1983. I wonder if there's a debate online of Dr. Tim, the geologist, talking about his findings with other geologists that completely throw what he says into the non-global floodwater.
When somebody tells me, you're wrong, these layers are millions of years old, does it help for somebody to understand they came up with the ages long before radiometric dating was even thought of or possible?
Right. In some ways, yes.
Okay.
They already were talking that right away about the end of the 18th century when James Hutton was looking at these unconformities, and he said, this must have taken a lot longer than we thought. And we're already talking millions of years in the 19th century, even before these techniques were developed in the 20th century.
Correct.
They just didn't know how old. And so, they jumped to millions because to me, it's like monopoly money.
Yeah.
Nobody can imagine a million years.
Nobody can imagine a million years? What the? Maybe you can't because your brain stops somewhere around 6,000.
Nobody can imagine a million years. And so they jumped right from hundreds of thousands of years, which you can almost imagine, 1,000 years, 2,000 years as humans we can imagine, maybe 100,000. But you jump that next order of magnitude to millions there's no hope.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that would hold up. Because Dr. Tim can't fathom just how long millions of years are, that's proof the rocks aren't as old as the invisible timestamps on them say they are.
Wow.
It's like you're playing with monopoly money. So they throw these millions of years around because they needed those millions and billions of years for any chance of their evolutionary story to be true.
Sure, nothing to do with the evidence for all that. Other scientists picked random numbers so that all of the data would fit. That's one of the worst arguments I've ever heard.
They have to kind of hide it behind this cloak of deep time.
And that is
so they developed that together along with evolution. I think it's basically satanic. It's the whole idea is this mystery where you got to have deep time. You got to have this evolutionary story. You can't have evolution without a lot of time because we don't see evolution happening today.
But not strictly true. You can see it happening. It's whether or not you accept it. And as for satanic, what does that even mean? Firstly, how do you know that Satan is real? Secondly, if Satan was real, why on earth would the devil think it's hilariously evil to allow people to observe evolution and read information as millions of years old? And when do we get to the part about rock-solid evidence for the global flood? Well, whilst Eric and Tim reorganise and get back on track, I can take this opportunity to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Atlas VPN. As a Brit living in the United States, I miss out on a lot of my favourite shows from the UK. With Atlas VPN, I can connect to a UK server and watch my favourite shows as though I'm back in the UK. Atlas VPN encrypts my data and gives me a new IP address, so it appears as though I'm actually back in Blighty. Everyone has heard of VPNs since it's 2022, and so you know that using a VPN makes your internet experience safer and more secure. Atlas VPN is more than just a VPN. It also blocks malicious links, trackers, and ads, and lets you know when someone is trying to steal your data. And it protects unlimited devices with a single subscription. Right now, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount. It means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. This is a limited-time offer, so get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below or by visiting get.atlasvpn.com/theskeptic. Back to the video.
Really, in history, the last 9 years of research that you've been able to do and all the drilling they've done offshore, this is really some of the best and really the first, I don't want to say the first time, but we're finally able to study geology from a young earth perspective and show how it confirms the Bible.
Right, exactly. When I started this, I said, let's just start, I talked to our predecessor, I started to Henry Morris III. He's like, I want you to work on that column project, whatever that is. He didn't really understand it all. But really what we're looking at is if you drilled a well right here, all the way down to the crust.
Please, someone make a gif of that.
There's no other way to interpret it, in my opinion. I show the people, the doubters, the old earth geologists, the people that are atheists, they don't believe in God at all. To them, they love my data, but I don't know how else to interpret it other than it confirms what God told us.
How on earth did you get your PhD then? Surely you're shown exactly what the data shows and then go from there. I don't know what this means, but a book I like says this, so I'll make it fit. It's not the same as what is actually evident. Though, I'm not a geologist, but it's evident you don't have to be a good one to have an opinion on this.
Why do we doubt? God told us there was a flood. He told us it was a global flood. If it wasn't a global flood, why would you bring the birds?
Even if there was a flood, which still hasn't been demonstrated since your rock-solid evidence hasn't made an appearance yet, but even if there was water covering the entire planet, how can you then demonstrate there was a boat, which many folks agree could never support itself, let alone the amount of creatures on the boat for the amount of time they were supposedly on there? And let's just say there was a giant boat that wouldn't break under its own weight given the dimensions. How could you demonstrate that there were birds on this vessel?
Why wouldn't the birds just fly away? Why didn't Noah just leave with his family in the decades they had to build the ark? He could have just left and gone somewhere else. If it was just the Middle East, why would you do the things they had to do and prepare?
More importantly, why didn't the other existing civilizations that were around at the time of the supposed global flood document about them drowning to death for a year or so and then picking up where they left off like nothing ever happened?
If you don't have a pen out and paper ready like I do, we are about to get a nice little lesson on the worldwide flood. Mm-hmm. Dr. Clarey, give us some rock-solid evidence of the worldwide flood. What all do you need to communicate to us?
I mean, we all do it. A bit of preamble before the video actually starts. But not 8.5 minutes worth, Eric.
The secular community or the conventional geologists have come up with 6 major floods. They believe there were 6 floods. They just don't believe it ever flooded everything. And so they see evidence that the sea level advanced and then kind of backed off, and sea level advanced and backed off. And they see that evidence in the rocks. They see the marine fossils deposited in Kansas, for example. They see marine fossils deposited in Alberta, Canada. And it's even worse than that for them, in my opinion, because you see mixing of land and marine. All over, everywhere I look, from India to Brazil to Europe particularly, we see mixing of land and marine.
Here's land, here's marine.
No, it's mixing in the same layers. We see 6 species of sharks in the same rock layer with the T-Rexes in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana.
Wow.
And it was 5 and they found a 6th one recently. But they have to argue these are all freshwater fish or freshwater sharks. And so to me, they have to kind of distort the reality of most sharks are ocean sharks.
Right.
Most sharks are ocean sharks? That's an argument. So even though there are freshwater sharks even today, it would have been impossible for sharks and dinosaurs to have coexisted. In freshwater areas, shark ancestors have only existed for 450 million years. T-Rex existed about 90 to 66 million years ago, so, well, now, look, I'm no Eric Hovind, but that math works for me.
16 times 2? 34. Right.
We also find coelacanth fish, that living fossil they found that's supposed to be extinct since the Cretaceous. And, there's supposedly this Cretaceous, but that's just a level in the flood. These words we use, Jurassic, Cretaceous,
I was wondering about that.
Level in the flood. They're not periods. There's no periods of time other than the flood, which was about a year.
There are no periods of time. Well, no, there are periods of time, but not the periods of time that are actually periods of time, because those periods of time don't fit with what I'm trying to say. No, there actually is one period of time, that whole 1 year that there was a flood. Yeah, right.
And the flood is what created all of what we now refer to as Jurassic Cretaceous.
Those are just
like
different. Those are kind of, it's almost like a relative level that we have to use to kind of, we use the terms, but we call them systems, not periods, because we don't want people to get the idea there's a period of time.
The Jurassic
This might have been a couple days, or it might have been a week during the flood that was being deposited pretty much globally. And you see the same fossils. So the original geologic column, they just started looking at fossils, how fossils changed, and said, okay, these fossils changed enough, let's call that a different system. They call it period.
So you changed the language so as to not confuse anyone, but then seem more confused yourself. If it was a period of 1 or 2 weeks per layer, how comes if everything went underwater at the same time, only specific species sank at certain times? Let's say all the Cretaceous creatures drowned at the same time as the Permian beasts, but the Permian animals sank first, weeks or maybe even months prior to the Cretaceous animals, just so that their fossils ended up in the right sequence. Does that not sound but a little ridiculous to you?
You're looking at the fossils, you're looking at where things end, and you're going, you're not necessarily, I mean, I know you're starting with a biblical worldview,
Right.
but you're not necessarily saying, how do I fit this data into the Bible? You're just saying, let me look at the data,
Right.
and
That's
it
how I
happens
started.
to fit the Bible.
It also happens to fit any other made-up story. Humans have an amazing ability to use their imaginations. I can explain how a tea bag ended up on the floor of my house by making up anything. A tea bag stealing opossum managed to sneak into my house but got spooked by one of my cats, dropped the tea bag and fled through the chimney. You know what I'd have to do though? Demonstrate it. So thanks for admitting you just make stuff up.
There really is strong evidence of a global flood, because the Bible talks about a global flood. Everything it hints at was a global flood. Even the New Testament references are a global flood.
So the evidence for a global flood is because it says in a book, and in some cases doesn't even say, but hints at. That's not evidence. That's a book saying something that hasn't been proven.
How do you have all 5 continents so far, and I'm working on the 6th one, how do you have all 5 continents do the same thing at the same time? If it's not a global event.
A global event.
It has to be a global phenomenon like that needs a global explanation. And the Bible tells us about it. The beauty of it all is it confirms exactly what the Bible said.
That's awesome.
Why do we doubt God's word?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe because it's not been demonstrated to be the word of a god.
Why do we doubt? Even in Job, they talk about the sauropods eating grass.
Yeah.
The behemoth eating grass.
Behemoth just means 4-legged beast. Nothing about it suggests dinosaur, and many Bible apologists think it's an elephant or a hippo, especially given in one Bible verse, Job 40:23, it talks about Behemoth's huge mouth drinking up the gushing River Jordan. Is this another case of shoehorning information to confirm bias?
The non-Christian people, or even some of the older people, are like, well, that's not a dinosaur. There's no dinosaurs after the flood. That's nonsense.
Yeah, right. That's the only bit that's nonsense.
Really, they didn't believe there was grass. Until 2005, in India, they found dinosaur dung from long-necked dinosaurs, sauropod dinosaurs, just like the behemoth most likely was.
Yeah.
They had 5 species of grass in it.
Wow.
So just like you can find your horse droppings, you can see what they ate. Grass doesn't fossilize well on its own, but if it's in dung, it fossilized really well. So they really were eating grass. And that's exactly what the Bible said all along.
How on earth does a book saying that a big beast ate grass confirm that there was a global flood? I must be missing something here.
The Bible told us behemoth was eating grass like the ox.
Yeah.
And they didn't even think, the evolutionary story was grass didn't even appear until after the dinosaurs went extinct.
Wow.
So here they are eating it. And they just, okay.
And, like Tim said, grass doesn't fossilize well, so grasses could have existed earlier. It's just that they haven't been found. Though in 2015, a 100 million year old piece of amber may have encased the earliest known grass, so it's entirely possible that grass did exist during the time of the great sauropods, though I do enjoy how much Eric's mind is blown by really simple things.
Wow. Wow.
They never go back and go, well, I guess we were wrong.
I know, that's
But
the
they
thing.
were so wrong in that case.
The
Just
evidence
little examples
keeps
like that.
stacking up, whether it's the soft tissue or the, what is it that Dr. Thomas studies, not collagen, is it collagen?
That's collagen. That's one of the proteins.
The collagen, that over and over and over, we keep seeing more and more evidence that, wow, this got it right. The Bible got it right.
And it was a recent flood. It was 4,500 years ago, according to the genealogies.
It was 4,500 years ago? I found an article written by Callan Bentley, and he said something perfect. 4,500 years ago, there were bristlecone pine trees growing in the White Mountains of eastern California. One wonders how Clarey reconciles that fact, a matter of counting the tree rings, with his silly idea that the whole planet was under seawater. Sorry, Tim.
It was a catastrophic flood, too. There was no tranquil flood to it at all. That's why we see all these animals buried and ripped apart and torn apart. We find bone beds of dinosaurs all shredded,
all
ripped
twisted
all apart.
Yeah.
But it was a progressive flood. That's what I'm seeing, which I never knew. Then I read Genesis chapter 7. I'm like, why didn't I see this? That's what God tells us.
See, that's it, because I've always thought, okay, it flooded. It rained 40 days and 40 nights, found out the great deep broke up, water's up, it sits there for a year, oceans, basins sink down. I guess it's, I haven't gone into that much detail.
I haven't gone into that much detail on it. Well, maybe you should. Maybe you'd question the absolute obvious. Where did all the water go? If it covered the earth, it can't sink away because it's already on the earth.
But you got to get the idea of the periods out of your head. There was no period of time, millions of years ago, when only these things lived. And that's the evolutionary story.
Okay.
All we see is a progressive, more and more rock layers piled on top of each other. But they're consistent with the fossils buried at each level because they were burying different ecological zones all around the world at the same time as the water went higher. And so it appears that God arranged the pre-flood world somewhat orderly. So through all this chaos of death and destruction, this judgment because of man's wickedness, there is all this order to the fossils. You can find order globally of the same fossils being deposited about the same time.
What a jerk. A god punished everything on earth for one person's wickedness. That one poor zebra, who maybe had never seen a human before in its life, was drowned because someone thousands of miles away did something that an all-powerful floaty sky being didn't like. Who on earth would want to believe in something that did that?
So you're
so dinosaurs all show up at the same time,
right?
Pretty much orderly, and then they disappear. There's no extinctions. That's just where their environment was totally wiped out by the advancing floodwaters.
Interesting.
So there's really no extinction events at all.
I'm sorry, what? Decades of research that repeatably and demonstrably show that species died out or, went extinct has just been debunked because Dr. Tim Clarey said so. I'm not entirely sure that'll work, Tim.
And are you seeing those ecosystems, if I can call them that?
Yeah.
Are you seeing them as different elevations?
I believe so.
Okay.
And that's some of the details I have to work out yet, because right now I'm just looking at these big chapters. I need to go back and look at some of the, the rocks are basically the pages of the flood. You can record the levels, but I'm looking at them in kind of chunks, chapters at a time, to look at the global picture.
That, I believe so, sounded more like a, sure, why not, to me. Hardly rock-solid evidence.
Got it.
But there's, more research for another generation.
I was like, that sounds like job security if you want to get into this, okay? Well, it sounds like there's a lot to do.
Somebody out there can go back and refill in more data that I'm doing. I mean, I'm trying to get representative data on every continent, and so I'm end up with a reasonable amount of columns. And most of them, again, are repeatable. This is repeatable. You could go out there and get the same result. But where I have to guesstimate sometimes is all the oil wells don't go all the way down to the crust.
Down to the crust? No wonder you're not understanding the data. You're drilling air. I'm pretty sure in that last video I did, you said to the crust again.
So if you drilled a well right here, it's all the way down to the crust.
Maybe I thought it was a slip of the tongue, but it seems Tim consistently says it. I know we should only question ideas and beliefs, but what kind of a geologist doesn't know what the outermost layer of the earth is called?
It's just interesting to me that you're saying this really is rock solid evidence. You got secularists going, you're right. Don't like the conclusion.
Yeah, they agree with the data. The data's real.
Oh, wow. The data's saying something, and secularists, which I'm glad we've moved away from the Hovind's term evolutionists, secularists saying we agree with what the data shows isn't the same as saying Tim is right and they don't like it. It seems to me that they're saying, well done, Tim, you understand what this says, but you're now squeezing it to fit your belief, which it just doesn't do. And that was your rock-solid evidence? Well, I really hope not. If you want to see some data that Tim has collected, feel free to check the link in the section below. It's interesting, to say the least, with lots of, I believe it could say this, nothing demonstrable. Some of it's hilarious, where he just points out what things are, with nothing remotely proving a flood. Here's a cave in Kentucky. Here's a map of the United States with some colours on it. I don't really think he knows what he's saying, let alone a non-geologist trying to get it. I was really hoping for a little more on this. Eric likes to blow the minds of non-believers. Tim likes to think that he has rock-solid evidence for the global flood. I'm not entirely sure we got either. But just know that the YouTube video ended abruptly and continued on paid-for services. Maybe the rock-solid proof was there. And there are still so many issues with the whole story anyway that weren't even touched upon here. What do you think? Let me know in the section below. And don't forget to check out the sponsor of the video, Atlas VPN. Their huge discount means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. This is a limited time offer, so get your deal by clicking on the link in the description below or by visiting get.atlasvpn.com/theskeptic. I'm going to skeptic this video off as, instead of rock-solid proof, paper-flimsy proof of a global flood. And even that's a stretch. A big thank you to this month's ticks on Patreon. MISM, Addy Rockart, the Enixes, Travis, Elizabeth, and the absolute lunatic Jimmy, as well as all the base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically, and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.